By far the most accomplished player in NBA history is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. 6 championships, 6 MVPs. He won a championship, actually 3 championships at UCLA. One of the very few things in terms of the GOAT debate that I agree with Nick Wright on is when he said that if the GOAT debate is about accomplishment, then the GOAT is probably Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He has the most comprehensive resume. To say that there's no weaknesses, well, there's really only one weakness, and I'll get to that in a minute. But he's the all-time leading scorer. He was a great defender on 2 great teams. As I mentioned in a prior video, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar led arguably the most dominant team in NBA history, and that was the 1971 Bucks. And then the 74 Bucks also got back to the NBA Finals, where they lost to the Boston Celtics in a classic series. But as dominant and as comprehensive as Kareem's GOAT case is, there is one weakness. And the weakness of his case revolves around the mid-70s. And the fact that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar missed the playoffs twice. And as I've laid out in other videos, Pantheon great players almost always get their teams to at least 500 and or the playoffs. Further edifying that point, Kareem missed the playoffs at a time where in the league's talent was diluted to some degree by the ABA. So he wasn't even competing with, Julius Erving in the mid-70s. And he still missed the playoffs. But with that said, my criteria is that I believe that, generally speaking, the highest scoring member of the all-defense team that has a chip is the best player in the league. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar holds that distinction for 8 consecutive years starting 1974. And it is my contention that he was the best player in the league from 1974 all the way up till 1982. Okay? So, the difficult part of researching this and coming to this conclusion was the 1975 season in particular. Because during that season, 2 things happened that I had a very, very difficult time reconciling. Number one, Rick Barry put on an amazing, historic performance, arguably one of the greatest single seasons in NBA history, where he averaged 34 points a game and he led a very mediocre Golden State Warriors team to an NBA championship. Rick Barry that team was one of the only teams in NBA history to win a championship with only one All-Star. And that team also only had did not have a present or a current for that season all defense team member. Jamal Wilkes was on that team. He was named Keith Wilkes at the time. And he would go on to make the all defense team subsequent. But in 1975, that Golden State Warriors team did not have a member of the all-defense team. And so, how do you reconcile that? Like, you've got Rick Barry putting his team on his back and winning the chip. How is he not the best player in the league? Furthermore, this was the season that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had secretly asked the Milwaukee Bucks brass for a trade. And so he played the entire season basically knowing that he was on his way out. And the team played terribly. The results were terrible. I'll get to that in a minute. The results were terrible. That 1975 team finished 38-44, and so and they missed the playoffs. So, how do I make sense of that? How do I still say that Kareem is still the best player in the league? Well, I have to really dive into the particulars of that season. So there are some factors that will explain why the Milwaukee Bucks performed so poorly, in spite of the fact that they had the best player in the league. Number one, Kareem was injured for the first 17 games of the season. Okay? So he only played 65 games. During the 65 games that he played, the Bucks were actually 35-30. Okay? So if you project that out over 82 games, they make the playoffs that year. Okay? Number two, so they traded Lucius Allen for Jim Price. And the thing is, Jim Price would subsequently suffer an injury in mid-February. So he ended up playing only 41 games. Okay? Now, mind you, this is after the Bucks are essentially trying to find Oscar Robertson's replacement, who had retired. Okay? So they trade Lucius Allen for Price, and then Price gets injured. They only play 40 games that year with Kareem, the second best player who ended up playing the whole season, Bobby Dandridge, and Jim Price. During that stretch, they are 24-16. Okay? So that tells me that but for those injuries and unfortunate circumstances, the Bucks would have comfortably made the playoffs. And, even though Oscar Robertson was diminished the previous season, losing Oscar Robertson is gonna take a toll on any team. Okay? So, the Bucks missed the playoffs. Kareem is traded the next year. In 1976, the Lakers missed the playoffs in Kareem's first season there. But they actually had a better record than two playoff teams. They just happened to be in a very difficult conference. They actually had a better record than two teams that did make the playoffs. It's not exactly an excuse, but it's not quite the same thing. They were 40-42. There was an adjustment period. Subsequent to that, that Laker team would continue to get better and better. They would make the conference semifinals 2 years in a row, and then they draft Magic Johnson in 1980. And so you have history unfolds the way we all know it unfolds. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was clearly the most dominant player in the league. Teams will take turns winning championships. You'll have you have the Blazers with Bill Walton. You had the Bullets and Elvin Hayes. You had the Supersonics win the championships. None of the great players on those teams compared to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And my rule is, generally speaking, the best player in the league does not lose his mantle until his performance declines. Kareem dominated. I'm not a big fan of the MVP, but of course he won his MVPs, pretty much all of them in the late mid-late 70s. And he was the best player in the league. And each and every year. In 1979, Moses Malone emerges and has a tremendous season. I believe he wins the MVP in 1979. But he doesn't have a chip yet. I can't give him the mantle until he wins a chip, and he does subsequently win the chip. Unfortunately, there's this guy named Larry Bird in 1983, but we'll get to that year. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the best player in the league for 1974, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1978, 1979, 1980, and 1981.